Okay, I'm recording this again because I managed to record without my microphone. So this is emphasized as the poem is from a Westerner's, I think I could say a Westerner's point of view, implying his lack of understanding and emotion, which is seen throughout the poem. To make it more precise, let's say his lack of understanding of the true experience of the Iraqi civilians. Okay. With this as well, I would need to then go on to the next poem and to show some comparison there. Notice how I've got some language analysis here with this image. I think you could be more explicit in saying that that is an image. So I then went on to type out another comparative sweating. So undoubtedly, the poet portrays the absurdity of nature in relation to its unrighteous. Undoubtedly, the poet portrays the absurdity of nature in relation to its unrighteous intervention, whereas Owen focuses on the immoral actions of humans rather than of the responsibility of nature, or rather than nature's actions on humans. A clear juxtaposition of a humanist viewpoint versus a naturalistic perspective. Again, I think this can be said, this is, or this can be seen as a juxtaposition. So Nick launches us into the detached grief of a victim's death through a sensory-filled image of humans' misuse of one of nature's gifts. Through the human's misuse, the apostrophe, of nature's gifts, breathing. By breathing a poisoned gas. Notice again how the full stop comes out of the quotation to suggest that the full stop wasn't in the text. I think in this case it was. Firstly, the opening stanza recognizes, notice that it's S for recognize because this is British English. Firstly, the opening stanza recognizes how civil unrest begins with the sacrifices of morality, instead of the tedious efforts of procreation. Now, I think that is talking about futilities, ideas of procreation. Now, to procreate means to reproduce. So I think that what the writer here is trying to say is that the tedious efforts to keep somebody alive, to foster, to continue life. Alternative interpretation is signposted here. Alternatively, it can be connoted that the use of chemical weapons to destroy and corrupt human experience is a particularly modern fear. Modern, in this case, is still being in the early part of the 20th century. In comparison, so we're now going to compare the initial poem to poem here, signposted with in comparison, which is the neutral comparison discourse marker. This part could come at the end of this paragraph. In comparison, Owen embeds personal frustration towards the purpose of mass murder through the subtle imagery of a soldier moving into, okay, I think I then edited this, into the subtle imagery of a soldier moving into the sun. Now, I know it wasn't moving, it was to be moved into the sun. So we really need to have there the square brackets to conjugate. It expresses the meaningless butchery of human beings as a means to project a nation's superiority. Full stop. So we're trying to make some contextual idea about the idea of nationalism in terms of analysing that part of the poem. I believe at this point I'm going to delete the rest of this in order to show how we can get the final sentence of comparison. What's important to note here is that we have the reference to the quotation, the imagery, and again we've got an adjective attached to that reference to technique, in this case the word subtle. Okay, so now I type out the paragraph that I wrote. It took me about 6 minutes in the course of the lesson. There were no notes I made from this. This is what I wrote. Both poets portray a sense of hopelessness in war. And just to remind you, the question is on the effects of war. So both poets portray a sense of hopelessness in war, although futility destroys this hope, while the yellow palm somewhat develops it. And I think that's a missed opportunity there, and I realized at the time, thought for a few moments, and then I moved on. I think what would be more helpful would be to talk about the ambiguity of that hope at the end of the poem. In futility, the sun is personified as kind and old. So again, straight into a productive language technique, referenced as the technique, along with an adjective to show extra analysis of that technique succinctly used. So in futility, the sun is personified as kind and old, both familiar and domestic adjectives that highlight nature as caring of human consciousness, a particularly humanist view. And whether or not that is a humanist view could be debated. Essentially, it's a view of nature having a human consciousness rather than, as caring for human consciousness, rather than there being an entity itself that cares for human consciousness. This hope becomes crushed in the devastating final line, a reference there to structure, where the voice questions why the fatuous sunbeam toil. And again, the reference to hope there, if I refer to it as poem, that would be a stronger reference to form, therefore hitting onto form, language, and structure, all within the context of the same line. And again, hopefully you're seeing the clarity and the succinctness of the style. Developing this increasingly disconsolate tone, so now we have the reference to form. Hopefully his toe is not disconsolate. Disconsolate means that you can't be consolated, you can't be sated, you can't be calmed. Part of Owen's desire to portray war as hopeless and against nature. A reading, typo, against those who would have been patriotic towards war or for war. Let's close it down. And nationalism. In contrast, okay, so now I have my analysis through here. I want to go on to my next poem. In contrast, the yellow palm, and I could put TYP if I had placed that after, in brackets, after the poem title here. So, in contrast, the yellow palm shows a strange sense of hope in the image of, follow my advice, the beggar child blessing a cruise missile. Notice here that I use the ellipsis to show that I may have broken from one part of the quotation to another. So in contrast, the yellow palm shows a strange sense of hope in the beggar child blessing a cruise missile with a peculiar smile. Stop. That is Western. Again, I think the styling sentence with that occasionally shows a certain sophistication in your style. That this Western word or term or idea or notion, bless, and again I should really have this conjugated with blessing, that this Western word blessing is used by the voice makes it apparent that the poet is ascribing his particular perspective, although I put particular before. Therefore, I could put especially within a special, no, peculiar. Let's read this again. That this Western word bless is used by the voice makes it apparent that the poet is ascribing his Western perspective onto a Middle Eastern being, perhaps through colonial guilt. Now, the knowledge here of colonial guilt will need to be contextual. The idea that imperialism and empire building may develop in the modern consciousness of that state a sense of guilt for some of the atrocities and the exploitation of certain nations, as well as, of course, the benefits that would have brought. Also, there's a generic literary theory of post-colonialism that you may know as well. Not necessarily for GCSE, but useful to show you here nevertheless. That the smile comes from an innocent and helpless child further demonstrates how mankind can be responsible for overcoming acts of violence. That's stark. Okay, I think I changed this now because of the issues of formatting. There we go. That this smile comes from an innocent and helpless child further demonstrates how mankind can be responsible for overcoming acts of violence. A stark difference from the lack of hope in futility. Now, this is the most important sentence here. Okay. Whilst you have some comparison at the end there, we need a comparison of both poems as a whole, as an overview here, and with clarity. Therefore, whilst the hopelessness of futility devastates the reader, there is a possibility of changing perception of the effects of war in the Yellow Palm. Full stop. Now, to be more precise here, I could have spoken about the ambiguity of the hope. And say the possibility of the ambiguity of the hope at the end of the Yellow Palm suggests that it could be changed from this negative and disconsolate response to the destruction of a country and something more hopeful. Okay. There we go.